All right, we're live. What's up, party people? My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. This is going to be our first interview for the week. I'm really excited about this interview, mainly because I feel like we're going to be talking about similar things to what we always talk about, but from a very different perspective, which I think is always healthy. The lady I'll be having on right now, her name is Jill Marie Ferguson. She is the founder and principal consultant of Samasana Consulting, an India-based strategy firm that helps startups, nonprofits, NGOs, and government bodies build responsible development into every stage of a project, from ideation to execution. I'm going to go bring on Jill. Hey, Jill, how are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks
I
for
am
having
well.
me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Are you in India right now or elsewhere?
I'm actually in Lisbon, Portugal at the moment for the next few weeks.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so I guess do you want to kick us off? What is Samsana? What do you guys build it? Samasana. And I tried to, introduce you a little bit, but maybe if you can double click on it and share what you guys are working on, that'd be great.
Yeah, so Samasana Consulting is a firm that I founded about 7, 8 years ago, which and over the course of our operations, we've been hired by startups, as you mentioned, to help design business plans, marketing analysis, positioning, launch strategies. We've also worked with governments, both on a local, regional level, building help out policy for Goa as a state, also being connected to bilateral partnership discussions between the EU and India for the sustainable modernization of the country. We've also worked with several nonprofits, helping them start from, creating the foundation from scratch, also working with pre-existing nonprofits to build new projects, strategy, fundraise, do grassroots mobilization. And India is very much our region of focus, but I work in other areas around the region as well, in Sri Lanka. And through my work as an impact producer with documentary films, I've also worked on global initiatives around marine conservation and environmental education and awareness.
Very interesting. So Jill, you trained in peace and justice studies and then ended up advising businesses and governments on responsible development, right? So what first pulled you towards that and like towards that intersection of kind of like business and impact?
So I was very fortunate. I went to University of San Diego for undergrad, and that has one of the most strongest study abroad programs in the United States. And so one of the study abroad programs that I was fortunate to go on to was Semester at Sea. And Semester at Sea, you live on a boat, and I circumnavigated the globe actually at that time and went to 13 different countries. And one of the people on the ship with us the entire time was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was part of the restorative justice practices after the apartheid in South Africa. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work, actually. And so he taught me, I got to learn under him. And after finishing that program, he was like, now you've seen what's happening in the world. You must, he was an archbishop, so be the hands of God and do the good work and everything. And I was graduating early, and I was pre-law originally, and then I found this master's program in peace and justice studies. And peace and justice, what it looks like, it's comprised of 4 components: human security, human rights, development, and conflict analysis and resolution. So I'm trained in all 4, but I specialize in human rights and development with a sub-focus in environmental issues that relate to the 2. So essentially what that means is that for peace to be possible to endure, there needs to be a certain amount of social equability and improvement and right? So what that looks like is, as humans, we want to, from a psychological standpoint, move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? We need our basic needs met: food, shelter, healthcare, all of those things. If those are not met within a society, then as a survival instinct, conflict will happen. So when you're creating business through the concepts of like conscious capitalism or firms of endearment, things like that, you can use business and business models to empower people with dignity, right? Because people want to be able to provide for their lives. They want to be able to survive, but they need the right access and opportunities, whether that means education opportunities, vocational training, job mobility, things like that to happen. But it also has to be done in a way that the environment doesn't get destroyed, because the most marginalized people around the planet, those who live below the poverty line, live closest to the land. They don't have access to, water filtration systems, or they grow their own food. They often fish. They often have animal husbandry, things like that. And so when the ecosystem in which they're dependent on for their livelihoods, for their life sustenance, gets polluted, it creates human rights issues, which can lead to conflict. And so I was lucky at my master's during the university, the Institute of Peace and Justice, the Kroc Institute, also at the University of San Diego. They had a specific program looking at the intersection of this. So actually, my first startup was my own. I was a finalist for a social innovation challenge at my university for $75,000 to start solving these type of problems, so bringing the intersectionality of peace, planet, and profit. Peace, people, planet, and profit. So they call it a quadruple bottom line, not just profit as the bottom line, but people and planet to create peace.
And then before consulting, you were an operator in Goa, right? Hospitality, a football foundation, civic platforms. What did actually running those ventures teach you that, you could not have learned advising from the outside?
I mean, I think the most important thing is adaptability. Like, you really have to understand that, and also that the best time to start is now, because the fact of the matter is waiting for the perfect ecosystem or the perfect environment or the perfect product is not possible, right? And in fact, the quicker you start, the more you learn and the more you can adapt and adjust and respond to the actual needs or wishes of your community, clientele base, whoever that is. So learning that definitely is something that you just, it's experiential learning. The more you do, the more mistakes you make, the better you are at being able to efficiently do things and learn from those mistakes. So yeah, I think a lot of startups would say this, but don't be afraid to make the mistake. Be afraid not to act, because not acting is what keeps you stagnant. Even if you make a mistake, you're still growing. You're still moving towards the end goal, whatever that is. So yeah, I think that would probably be the biggest learning I had from all of those operations.
And then your 2 years as managing director at the Forca Goa Foundation. Is that how you pronounce it?
Forza Go.
Forza. Oh, okay. Forza.
Yeah,
Put you in kind of like grassroots and community work. What was
yeah.
the kind of the hardest part of turning good intentions into, programs that actually moved?
I mean, again, I think one of the really important learnings from that is the fact that intention is not enough, right? You need to have an impact assessment to make sure that the intention is being met by correct action. And that means oftentimes kind of learning how to overcome your own ego, right? Because we become attached to the strategies and the ideas that we have. We want those to work. But actually, the fact of the matter is the community needs to tell us whether or not that's working. Right? Does it work for them? How does it work? And anytime we come into any space, we come with our own preconceived notions, experiences, kind of ideas. And oftentimes those things need to be an idea to work in a grassroots setting needs to be co-created, co-owned by the community itself. Because if there's buy-in from the community, the chance for it to sustain and endure is much longer. So I would say that, yeah, for me, the biggest learning there was making sure that you're taking the time, because it does take time, to check back in with the community that you are servicing or working with to ensure that the intentions that your strategies are based beyond are actually being met, and that you're having the type of impact and results that you want to have. So you need to really pre-plan that design into your strategy of taking those reporting and structures and communication with the different people. My idea from when I started Forza Goa with FC Goa, the professional football team, and my dear friend Akshay Tandon, who was the president of FC Goa at the time, to then what we ended with evolved a lot in the first year. And the first 6 months, honestly, part of what I did was just going around to everybody and anybody in the community I could, and asking questions and learning and seeing like what was the need, what were the things that seemed most important that would also be easy for us to address, because you can't do everything, especially from the beginning. So where to begin? And luckily for us, football is a great unifier, especially in Goa. I mean, the whole world, people love football all over the world, right? The World Cup's happening right now. The amount of people that are going crazy to watch the games is pretty high. So for us, it was this amazing thing that in Goa, there are more football fields than there are local panchayats, which local panchayats is like your local governance body, just to say how much football is beloved by the people there. And we were working with kids ages 6 to 13, and then that leading into the academy for the professional football team. So having that as a way to bring the community together made our job a lot easier to then educate, inspire, and empower the community around other issues connected to that. So yeah.
What's circle wallas?
So circle wallas. So that's a funny. So circle wallas. So I'm trained in several different tool sets, essentially, to help with community engagement, grassroots mobilization, and collaborative design thinking. And so some of those things are, for instance, asset-based community development, placemaking, nonviolent communication skills, the art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matter, sociocracy. These are all different kind of frameworks that have come out over the years by people working in community to try and create different ways of engaging. And Circle Wallas is a group of friends of mine and colleagues who are all trained in these different methodologies, who get brought in and hired by the community to help mobilize these types of conversations. So the reason why we say Circle Walla is because historically, traditionally, within like the beginning of humanity, our elders, when you look at indigenous communities, the elders would sit in circle, right? Because the idea was that there's a leader in every chair and there's wisdom to be held. And that when we come together in circle and we bring those different perspectives, that shared learning, that shared wisdom, then the strategy, the solution is going to be much more sustainable and much more practically implemented because everybody feels a part. So the circle walla is the person who helps bring the circle together, hold the circle, and host it in such a way that we get that collective wisdom and learning to create a solution or a vision for the community that everybody is excited about, buys into, and believes is possible.
And you helped shape Goa's resource efficiency policy, right? So what did getting inside the policy process show you about, how change really happens?
I mean, I think it's one of those things where you have to have a top-down and a bottom-up approach simultaneously, understanding. So Circle Wallas was subcontracted from GIZ to do this initiative, which is essentially, this was one of the earlier projects. I worked with the government policy on other things later on, but the resource efficiency initiative and transition to circular economy was something that was kind of a goal, which is a goal internationally, to try and help meet international sustainable standards for the 1.5 degree goal from the Paris Accord agreement, right? So because of that, they hired us to talk to the community again about what are actual solutions that you can do, right? Because oftentimes people push down a top-down approach of like, okay, everybody needs to do this. But if it's not practical because it's not coming from the culture or the purchasing power or the fit for purpose within the climate, then it's not going to be implemented. So you need to have solutions that are accessible, that the community can actually implement in a real-time strategy. Otherwise, again, you're just pushing back the ability to address these types of issues that are affecting the people most. And so we were brought in from the Resource Efficiency Initiative to conduct conversations and workshops with representatives from the different industries that we were specifically designing that policy for. So we looked at construction, waste management, and tourism, because those were some of the biggest problem statements that the community gave back to us, as well as some of the biggest industries in terms of employment within the state, and how could we be more efficient in the resource usage and the transition towards circularity. Because India, being one of the fastest growing economies in the world and having the largest population in the world, is very much developing at a very rapid rate, which means that there's a lot of construction going on. There's a lot of needs that are outlined in terms of that development protocols and processes. But within the country itself, it doesn't have enough resources to meet the growing demand of buildings. So for instance, there's not enough sand and steel to build about 70% of the buildings that are still yet to be projected to be built. Because cement, for instance, utilizes sand from rivers specifically. And the more you dredge the rivers, the more environmental degradation happens, the more flooding happens, the more other damage from the marginalized communities along those coastlines also happen. So knowing this, that when the scientists and people come together, that the future of it, how do we then design buildings differently? What materials can we use differently? What are any of those types of things? So that's kind of that. And even like with tourism, what is a carrying capacity of a landscape before it becomes problematic? And what is the infrastructure requirements to support that carrying capacity, whether it's water, sewage, waste, electricity, and all of these things are industrial requirements the whole world needs to think about. But in a place like India, when I first moved there was no garbage collection in Goa whatsoever. And there was, not whatsoever, but in a standardized way, the first time all 191 panchayats had a weekly collection of waste was 2019.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, no, like I was telling you in our prior call, my parents they spend half the year in Calcutta, and so it's not even like the nicer parts of it, unfortunately. And so I've seen the open drains and the sewage. Unfortunately, there are other sides of India, obviously. Like I've lived in Bangalore and whatnot, but it's such a like stark difference. Hey, I was gonna ask you, so who or what shaped your thinking the most? Like the people, books, or ideas that you kind of keep, coming back to in this work?
I think it keeps evolving over time, because I think I know that the more you learn, the more you realize how much more you need to learn in terms of being able to do this. And I think the people I work with also help shape my learning to understand, because obviously I'm a white woman from the United States. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I come from a, working class family, middle class family, but like I'm very privileged. I'm very, very privileged compared to a lot of the people I work with. And so living and working and understanding when developing policy for those people who don't necessarily have the same voice or access or education is really important to understand their wisdom. Everybody has different forms of intelligence. They know the land, they know the climate, they know the animals, the species. They have so much wisdom that is far more expansive and deeper than mine. But other people in terms of my life also, like I was lucky enough, like I said, to listen to Archbishop Desmond Tutu speak a lot while I was on semester at sea. I also got to listen to and meet the Dalai Lama when I was in university. I got to meet so many different like individuals over the years who really kind of showed me what is possible in terms of having an impact and making change and things like that. And I think today, like Sylvia Earle, also somebody, an ocean person, obviously Jane Goodall, all of these type of environmental people who have spent their whole lives being a voice for the planet, but through their work have been able to kind of uplift and make it at least part of the discussion. Locally, also, there's a group in Goa called Goa Foundation. Claude and Norma Alvarez, they are hugely important on a local standpoint within Goa. Goa has less than 1% of the Indian population, with only about 1.82 million people that are Goan that live there. And 30% of all of the NGT cases in the country come from Goa and come very much from different mobilized people, meaning they're fighting to protect the land, understanding how important that land is. Because Goa as a state in India is the most forested. It has 66% forest coverage. And the forest that goes in the south side of Goa is considered, as part of the Western Ghats, the 8th most biodiverse rich place in the world. So there are new species being discovered all the time. And so the people there know that, and they mobilize very quickly to fight to protect it. And I draw so much inspiration from all of them, because it's not easy, right? When you're against the fastest growing economy in the world and one of the biggest populations, to be a voice for nature and protect the landscape, knowing that the balanced ecosystem is important for the safeguard of future generations, right? So yeah.
So what were you building right before? I think I pronounced it wrong. Is it Samasana, or how did you say it?
Samasana.
Samasana. Okay, Samasana.
Yeah.
And what made you decide it was kind of like, time to start your own practice?
I mean, I kept getting asked just to like help support other people, like on a friend basis and this and everything. So first I set up a hotel, restaurant, water sports school, and the first surf shop in India, actually, with my ex partner. We started it in 2013. So right after grad school, I went there and kind of did that, and it's still there. Vaikula is the hotel, Prana is the restaurant. We have a surf school, all of this stuff. And part of why I set that up also with him was because I realized that you don't protect what you don't know and what you don't love, right? So helping people build a relationship with the ocean and with their environment over time, and environmental ethic will seed and born naturally, organically. Some of the biggest conservationists around the world are some of the biggest enthusiasts. They're the surfers, the mountain climbers. Like, you look at like Patagonia, for instance, that was started by a climber guy who fell in love and was trying to find more sustainable like tools so he could climb and not destroy the rock face. And so this is kind of how it happens, is that oftentimes the biggest enthusiasts, because they feel connected to nature, because it's a source of their joy, their relaxation, their peace, their everything, over time they will protect it. And in India, over 90% of the population doesn't know how to swim. And so they don't have a direct connection with the ocean and the coastline, which is crazy because India has one of the largest coastlines on the planet in terms of over, I think it's now, they just changed the amount, because it used to be 3,400 kilometers, but they just realized that they had mismapped it, same like the population. And so it's actually even more than that, right? There's so many islands and all of this stuff. So I was like, and I liked the idea of also trying to implement the principles of conscious capitalism, which conscious capitalism is another kind of framework that you asked me about or talked about before, which essentially looks at the fact that businesses done ethically, responsibly, can empower communities, where it's not just about the shareholders or the bottom line, but all of the stakeholders. And all of those stakeholders need to be brought into your operational strategic design from day one. And so your stakeholders are your employees, if you work with like other suppliers, your shareholders, obviously also, but the environment in which you operate as well as a stakeholder, the community in which you operate is a stakeholder, and each one of those have to be considered and respected and empowered in the way that you operate. So when I get hired now as a consultant to ask people, I ask three main questions, which is one, what is the need that you are trying to meet? Two, how is this different than what somebody else is doing? And three, why are you the person meant to be doing this? Why are you the person, right? And that's whether it's a startup for a business or a nonprofit. Because instead of starting a whole new nonprofit, maybe it's about finding a nonprofit that actually has more experience, is more integrated into the community already, as all that, and supporting their work, which comes from transitioning the framework from I need to be the savior, I need to be the one to do this, to the collective well-being. I am a part of this because we are nature. And so you have to change your framing to not look independent of it, but collectively a part of it. The health of the whole affects my health.
Was there a single moment when like responsible development went from like a job to a mission for you?
I think it was a mission before it was a job, to be honest. Because, like, when you, for instance, get a master's in peace and justice studies, it's not something that people really think
Mm.
about. It's not something that you plan to make a lot of money with. It's something you do because you want to be of service. You want to be able to make a positive impact. And for whatever reason, this is just kind of how it's always been for me. Like, when I was a little kid, I mobilized my first homeless Thanksgiving dinner that I got like fully paid for and stuff when I was in the sixth grade. Sixth and seventh grade, I organized it year after year. I would get all the food donated by the local grocery stores, and I would mobilize the volunteer base, and then that. And then in high school, yeah, I did like St. Vincent de Paul, teen feeds. I was feeding the homeless like twice, at least once a week, every week. And then after Hurricane Katrina, I went and I did relief work in Biloxi, Louisiana. So it was just kind of always stuff that I did like I felt very much connected to and responsible for the gift that was my life, the privileged position I was born into, and understanding that I should use that for the greatest good, to uplift and empower, because I got there based off of the work of people who came before me. Not even 100 years ago, less than 100 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to buy my own house, have my own bank account, do all of this stuff, have autonomy over myself, any of those things. It's because women came before me and put in that effort to make my life more free and better. So I felt like, I guess, a sense of duty and kind of gratitude to them to continue the work.
You've also said that, I guess, and to speak to the title of this episode, right? So you've said that behavioral change, not tech, is the most important thing to slow the climate crisis. So when did that conviction crystallize for you?
Through doing more work and looking at the science and the numbers and understanding and living in the field, right? Like my first, as part of my master's, I lived in rural Gujarat. I was living 45 minutes south of Ahmedabad. And the villages, Nani Defti was the village I was living in, was very close to a series of special economic zones, right? Which were being credited hugely for the increased GDP growth of Gujarat as a state, which in that 10-year period when Modi was chief minister, became the fifth highest grossing GDP in the country. But what I was seeing, because I was helping, I was volunteering with a nonprofit called Nafsarjan Trusts at the time, who was build cases on behalf of scheduled tribes and scheduled castes and Muslim communities, marginalized communities from across the state. They were building a case against all of the industries within that special economic zone because all of them were dumping their pollutants into the waterways, both the bywater as well as the physical pollutants. And that meant that the local villages, which about 98% of them couldn't afford things like water filtration or this type of stuff, were drinking, bathing, cooking in that water. When you would cook your rice, the rice would turn pink. So there was a huge health outbreak where a bunch of people had kidney stones and a lot of skin diseases and issues as a side effect of the polluted waterways. And so that was kind of like the first, like, okay, I'm physically seeing this. I'm going around to the community, talking to people, trying to see, okay, how many of you have kidney stones? How many of you have skin issues? Showing the things and all of this, and then feeling very disempowered, because the reality is that, and this has been a trend for years. It's not something that's new, but like a lot of times, because places like the EU and the US and Canada and kind of the global north have much higher environmental protections and standards against certain industrial development, right? that when the EU, the US, Canada, any of these places then put like a hard line, like, okay, this technology is no longer accepted here because it doesn't meet our protective regulations, it gets then dumped in the global south as a way for a business to extend their profitable lifespan. So for instance, there's like types of technologies like nuclear power plants, which do not pass regulation within the global north, which then get built in India. And so this happens a lot, unfortunately, because and it's a difficult argument, because in places like India and the global south, they're like, okay, you guys went through your industrial revolution however long ago, right? And so at that time, the US is very polluted in many ways. The UK was super polluted. People died, honestly, from air pollution and water pollution and all this stuff during the Industrial Revolution in those places. And so it's one of those questions of like, we from the global north can't tell them that they shouldn't be allowed to develop because they deserve it, right? And this is one of those questions that I think is why, for me, I said it's about behavior over technology and tech solutions, because it's about understanding the global good, right? The whole, which is, okay, so for right now, just take a step back. We have a set of goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, which were created internationally and agreed upon internationally, that us as, humanity wants to address this. And the first one is eradicating extreme poverty. Yeah. Which right now, extreme poverty in the world census is $3 a day. Yeah. So trying to up that. And right now, what's happening is, while overall people believe that extreme poverty is on the decline, which it kind of is, at the same time, it's also getting exacerbated. So actually, extreme global poverty since 2024 has actually gone up by 0.3%, because the inequality divide is so, the wealth gap is so extreme now, and the consumption of the top is so much that the top 0.001% consumes 3 times the bottom half of the planet. And even if you look at extreme poverty as a divide, okay, $3 a day, well, people in the United States who are in poverty, the poverty line in the United States is about $16,000 round, okay, which is $40 a day, $45 a day. So again, the data and the scripts, it's like, what are our goals? Do we want to uplift humanity? Do we want to make a more socially just world? Do we want to make a more balanced, healthy ecosystem in which all future generations can be sustained and survive? Or do we want to just continue to allow this extreme gap to kind of go unabated? And the best way that everybody gets uplifted is if we're able to put kind of checks on unnecessary growth, right? Because, for instance, things like I became a vegetarian 16 years ago. I come from a hunting family. My dad eats meat. Meat was a part of every single meal my whole life. But when I started doing this work, it was like, okay, the best way that I can reduce my carbon footprint as an individual is to eat less meat. It's just one of those things. It's behavioral change. And I'm not saying everybody needs to become a vegetarian. That's not practical. But it's that awareness of how certain behavioral choices and things will change the zone. Like, we know, for instance, there's enough clothing made for the next 8 generations. There's more clothing than the next 8 generations of humans need. And consumption of clothing has gone up. And so there's side effects of all of these things. So it's a behavioral change is the most important thing, because there's a, and we were talking about this before, there's a simulator that MIT made with another group called Climate Interactive. And you can go in and you look at all the different choices that you can make as an industry, as a policymaker, as all of that, to kind of identify what would be the thing that would help us reach the 1.5 degree target of the Paris Accord, of the Paris Agreement, right? And of all of the things, I think degrowth is the most important, because even if you say, okay, we're going to switch all to renewables, right? So that we don't have fossil fuels, so that we can take out carbon from the atmosphere. That switch, if everybody consumes more and more and more and more and more endless electricity year on year, the amount of minerals needed for that, the amount of land needed for that, all of that is not enough. So there's other planetary limitations that we have as an ecosystem, as a planet, as nature, that oftentimes we think that we can solve our way out of. But it's, and not to say that technology can't create amazing solutions. It can, and it has, and it does, but it's also that kind of timeline. Like there's I don't know if you've heard the overshoot day, if you've heard of that.
No.
Have you heard of overshoot day? Okay. So this has been going on for a while, but the overshoot day is the day of the year by which we have overconsumed the amount of resources that the planet can naturally regenerate within 1 year. And last year, it was July 24th, 2025. So we consumed all the resources that the planet could regenerate sustainably normally by July 24th last year. So every year we're doing that. We're not able to give the planet and the ecosystems enough time to regenerate and regrow as they happen, because you can speed things up a little bit, but like nature takes time to grow it food, to make oil, to do whatever the thing, to make the minerals that are needed in the nickel or the copper or any of that type of stuff. And there's another set, which is the planetary limits, which there are 9 of, which now they say that we've passed 7 of those 9 as of last year also, in terms of being able to kind of recover. And this is why what we know is that when COVID happened and the world stopped, right? We stopped traveling so much. There was not as much shipping, all of that. Ecosystems bounced back, because the other argument that people will say, which is true, is that the planet has gone through different climate life cycles. We've had ice ages, we've had the dinosaurs, we've had all these different things. The planet will recover. Nature recovers with enough time. It's about our ability as humans to live within the constructs of that regenerative time space for us to be able to live healthily within it.
Interesting. So that's a contrarian take in a world betting everything essentially on new tech. Where do you think the tech will save us crowd gets it most wrong?
I think it's about, like, I honestly feel like part of it is that they haven't spent enough time in places being most affected by this climate crisis, right? Like if you live in a futuristic city where everything functions really well, where you have water in your tap, where you have somebody picking up the trash on a weekly basis, where you don't have any power outages, then you don't see it, you don't know it, it's not in your face. And so that, like I said, that emotional connection to it people don't see. And it's one of those things where it's about, like, for me, it's about having that compassion for the greater good and understanding that like I'm a human rights person. So I believe all human life is valuable. I believe all human rights, all people should have access to clean drinking water and to livable environments. Like right now, India is facing one of the deadliest heat waves it's ever seen, right? Because it's El Nino season as well. So Mumbai just posted a thing that they're 45 days out from zero water. Yeah. And that's a city of how many people, right? Like it's insane. And this is what people don't realize and don't talk about is, so what's happened right now in terms of like the AI conversation, okay, is that in the US, all these AI data centers were being built predominantly in communities that were more marginalized, people of color, to be honest, like, right? Like one of the biggest ones that's gotten a lot of I shouldn't say bad PR, but like that's very contentious is the one with Gork, Elon Musk's one in Memphis, Tennessee. Have you not heard about it?
Gork or
yeah.
Grok? Like Grok, okay, yeah.
Grok.
No, tell me about it.
So essentially, he built this very quickly, the data center that he pushed through the whole kind of market, and it didn't have the electricity power load to be able to supply, like the local city, local town didn't have enough power to be able to supply that data center. So he put all of these generators in to power that plant. These are highly pollutant generators, which are only supposed to traditionally be used in natural disaster like interim short-term usage when the grid is down and you don't have a choice. They're highly methane pollutant, and so there's been a spike in medical diseases, noise pollution, water contamination, all of this different type of stuff within that. This is why there's a huge movement that across the United States, AI data centers there's a huge pushback against it, because and Erin Brockovich has actually even now put together a website where she's pooling reports from communities all across the country to showcase how damaging it is for the health of the local communities and the increased cost of electricity as well as the water usage. And there's even now a new study that just came out about how these data centers cause heat islands, so they can raise the temperatures around them by 16 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so you're talking about putting then a data center in a place that already is very hot, whereas if you are at 40, it's 41 degrees, 42 degrees extended exposure, then you hit heat stroke, organ failure, and death. That's what happens in India during these extreme heat waves, right? So you're going to put a data center in the middle of that where it's already super hot. It's going to create a heat island. It's going to consume the water, and it's also going to take the electricity to a certain thing. I'm not saying that you won't eventually be able to find a more sustainable solution for this, but does the humanity and the populations around it deserve the negative impact while we're trying to get there? That's the bigger question to me, is what is our goal? Is our goal just to, it kind of comes back to even like if you saw the movie Oppenheimer, which showcased the creation of the atom bomb and what that led to in terms of the fallout and nuclear disarmament and all of these different types of questions. Just because we can and have the power to create a technology doesn't mean we always should, right? What is the thing? Because also then if I look at a thing in terms of like, again, if the goal is to help uplift people out of poverty, and right now we know that last year alone, AI also caused 14 million jobs layoffs. So, and that's only going to continue to increase in terms of the amount of people whose jobs are being affected by this. Then there's also what is training the data sets in terms of the amount of information, because again, in places, a lot of the world, about 60 to 70% of the population lives in rural parts of the world, right? And so they're underrepresented in the data set. Okay, take even the modern world. Women, myself as a woman, were only included in medical research from the 1990s, right? So we're training systems with incomplete data sets and with data sets that come in with a preconceived lens, which is difficult for people to see if they only stay within the same bubble their whole life, right? You don't realize the lens that you are born in, that you are subjugated to, because that lens is very much created by the culture, the community, and the climate in which you are raised. When you live and work abroad, you experience this more.
On Turtle Walker, you were the impact producer, right? Not just telling Satish Askar's story, but building a stranding network off the back of it, right? So what did that teach you about turning a narrative into a real world change?
Yeah, I mean, what was really beautiful is the fact that what it taught me is, like, for instance, people don't necessarily always think logically or rationally, but they think very emotionally, right? So people make choices, like, for instance, we do things for the people we love, for things we love, right? We all care about the personal well-being of our partners and our families. It's very important to us. And so when you have a good narrative that helps somebody feel something for that cause, for that, whether it's an animal, an ecosystem, or an issue, then you can leverage that feeling towards targeted action if you're really specific, to make it easy for people to act, right? Because I personally believe fundamentally that I don't think people are bad. I honestly don't think people are bad. I think people are people, and I think people can have huge amounts of love and compassion and goodness within them. And I think most people are just looking for a sense of connection and community. And that when you look back on your life to the things that feel most important and matter, it's those moments you shared with the people you love, right? Those beautiful kind of, it's not a thing that you have, it's the people that you're with to experience those things. And so the beautiful thing about having like a documentary or film is that you're able to kind of help create that storyline. I mean, you don't create it, but you share it, you showcase it. You're able to bring people's awareness to a story that happened to a person, to an individual, to something that then makes them feel something. And then your job, or my job at that point as an impact producer, was to figure out how I could help leverage those feelings towards driving real on-ground action that was in line with Satish's legacy and Satish's life's work, which he was the grandfather of turtle research in India. He started surveying Indian coastline in 1977. He walked over 2/3 of the Indian coastline, discovered all the major nesting sites of the species of turtles that exist in India, which led to their protection, and their recovery, and the creation of the first marine protected areas in the country. And he was a citizen scientist. He didn't have a master's in marine biology. He loved turtles, and he was an introvert and liked spending time in nature with, these wild animals. And because of him, he was able to do that. And so being able to directly support the animals he loved, as well as the ecosystems in which they, need to live to survive, felt like the best way to honor his life's work and his legacy. So yeah, we built a marine mammals training network in collaboration with several organizations that operate in Karnataka, Goa. They're moving into Maharashtra, and they have a telemedicine veterinary helpline now, where they take calls from the entire coastline of India, and if needed, then they go. So like there was a mass stranding in Tamil Nadu last year that they went to go assist on. They just did a training in the Philippines, and now we are organizing a training in Sri Lanka.
Interesting. So was there like a project or a failure that genuinely changed how you work? Like where the lesson only landed, the hard way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's been a few, but I think probably the biggest one was the one with my ex. To be completely honest and blunt, I think the fact of the matter is that relationships have a lot of power to teach you the most in life. I think that's where you learn the most, as actually in terms of, because when you're with somebody, any relationship, whether it's a wife, a husband, a brother, a mother, a sister, any different types of things, we learn about ourselves through our relationships with others, because we see ourselves differently through our relation to them. We see our strengths, we see our weaknesses. It's very humbling, right? So it's very humbling to learn that these are things that I need to work on, or I need to do better. And I don't like to look at it as I would say like a failure, but it was a very important and beautiful chapter in my life that I would do again if I wanted to. But it definitely impacted me the most in terms of growth and learnings and all of that, because we also had a business together. So
Right.
Working with your significant other is not necessarily always advisable. It's one of the most challenging things possible to work with your with your partner. It's challenging, to say the least. But I think with the right maturity and the right understanding, then it's definitely possible. And I'm really proud of what we built and were able to create together, irregardless. And I love the fact that legacy continues in Goa to this day. And, it's a place that a lot of the community feel very connected to and love. And yeah, so I'm very proud of that. But yeah, there was a lot of learnings through that whole process and things that I'm still learning.
You talk about conscious capitalism and essentially business as like this heroic endeavor. What experience convinced you that, profit and principle essentially do not have to like trade off?
Just the fact that okay, so for instance, one of the big things that happened in the last year is that USAID got fully gutted, right? So all of a sudden, a bunch of programs around the world kind of collapsed, which was horrendous and incredibly sad, because it meant that entire communities, entire ecosystems were all of a sudden kind of in a difficult scenario. And the fact is, with capitalism or a business like a social enterprise, it's a much more sustainable model, right? Like, I've been a managing director of nonprofits. I've also had businesses, all of that. And when you have money coming in from the sale of a service or a product, you can continue to operate. Whereas if you're a nonprofit, you're dependent on donations or grants, which year after year can come or not come, right? Because things happen, which means that sometimes the business that was funding you in terms of a grant or a donation, maybe they didn't do as well in terms of how much money they made. They didn't hit their target. So then all of a sudden they don't have the extra money to give to you. Or maybe they decided that they don't want to support marine conservation anymore. They want to support child development. It doesn't matter. The thing is, it makes you a lot more vulnerable, because you cannot control and you can't 100% always depend on the cash flow, which is required to run your operations. Running a nonprofit is definitely more difficult than running a business. I've done both, and I can tell you that, because in a business, I create a product or a service. I provide that product or service to my client, and they pay me for it. And then the loop continues. In a nonprofit, I have to go out, I have to fundraise, and then I have to create a product or a service for my constituency, for the people that I am servicing, the need base within the community. But then I have to go back and I have to do all this reporting to showcase that the service or the product that I had was effective, and then give it back to the donors to ensure that they are happy with how they've invested their donation. Right? So it's not a one-to-one at all. It's much, there's more steps in that, and it's much harder. And unfortunately, the kind of international expectation is that if you're running a nonprofit, you should do it because you love it, and that you don't necessarily deserve to get paid as much. So the standard is like admin is 10% max of expenditure also, which then makes it very difficult sometimes to retain talent or to keep things kind of moving. So a social enterprise or a sustainable business can help directly address a problem, but make sure that you don't have that extra stress of financial instability of depending on donations and grants only. Because in the last couple of years with USAID and kind of different political shifts, a lot of the funding that was available has all of a sudden just disappeared. And so there's a scarcity mindset now.
So when you look at how most organizations approach sustainability today, what's the gap between what they say and what they actually do?
The gap is, it's huge. And that's part of the problem, is that there's a lot of greenwashing. This is also why I personally don't like to label the things I work on as sustainable, because I think there's like the most sustainable thing to do is actually to leave an ecosystem as is to not touch it. Because an old growth forest is far more efficient in terms of carbon sequestering and habitat creation and all of these things than me going in and trying to create anything else. So I try and avoid some of these. Obviously I use them. I have to, because that's the language, the vocabulary we're given for people to make sense. But greenwashing is a huge problem in terms of people overcommitting to what they do. And people are very wary of being as honest of where they're at in that journey, which is why we kind of framed it in Go. We created the Responsible Tourism Collective, because we were like, we want to make it easy for people to start taking the steps towards being more sustainable. Because like there's that quote, right? I'd rather have 1 million people do sustainability imperfectly than one person doing sustainability perfectly. Because we need everybody in this journey together, making mistakes, learning day by day, doing things more conscientiously, and understanding the interconnection of everything. So taking that, for me, it was like, okay, if we can frame it in that way, then it feels less daunting because we're human. I'm not perfect. I'm not a perfect sustainable person either. Like I'm every year I'm trying to do better and be better, but it's a journey and I'm constantly learning things. There's a quote by Maya Angelou, which I love, which is do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And I feel like that's what I try and kind of live by on my journey. And I try and definitely advocate other people is like, it's okay if you're imperfect. It's just about starting. That's why I said, even in terms of the startup journey, it's like the biggest failure is not doing anything at all, is not starting.
Speaking of failing, this show lives at the convergence of AI, Bitcoin, and robotics. Technologies, arguably moving faster than the guardrails around them. If you were advising founders building those, where should human rights and environmental thinking enter the process?
I would say it's stage one, like design stage and thinking about all of that. Like a couple things that also just really quickly. So I'm going to plug in my phone because if it dies, then this thing actually 1 second. Sorry. 1 second. Sorry.
Angel, I know I went over quite a bit on my interview, but so if you'd like, because I had another 6 or 7 left. If you want, we can also punt this to part 2 if you've got to run. But I'm also available for another 10 minutes. I can't hear you for some reason. I think I lost you. Yeah.
Okay, 1 second.
And like I said, Jill, I know you probably weren't ready for like an hour-long marathon here. So happy to punt like part 2 to next week or something if that works better for you.
It's up to you either way. We could do next week. Otherwise, now I'm good as well.
You've got a few minutes. Okay, let's land the plane. Yeah, I've got about 8 minutes on the clock here as well. So yeah. So do you want me to move on to the next question? I just had a couple more actually. Go ahead.
I'll answer that question, what you said. So there's a couple different things that I would suggest. Like, for instance, the UN just came out with a report called the Environmental Costs of AI Energy Use, which goes into depth to look at it, that it's not just about the carbon footprint. It's also about land use. It's also about water use. It's also about those types of things. I would say there's also like a friend runs a research kind of lab called, I'll have to get back to this one. There's a lot of different bodies out there that are researching how to make AI more ethical, right? And how to kind of do this in a way that is in consideration of the people and the communities in which the hardware is operating, as well as kind of how the data is being utilized and data protection for individuals. So I would say if this is something that you're really interested in, then to go to those areas, to read these reports, to understand the greater impact of these different types of things, because there is a good example of a country who's figured out how to kind of address some of the side effects is Norway. Norway has utilized the extra heat from the data centers to actually heat the cities. Yeah. So they figured out a closed loop system to make a problem a solution.
Right.
And so this is where system thinking design is very important. But that solution only works in Norway because it's cold. In India, that's not going to work. Which is why you need to figure out where are you operating within the world? Where are you operating? Where's your back end? Again, if you're looking at like taking in just kind of the framework of conscious capitalism, list out all your stakeholders, list out the climate in which you're operating, list out the community in which you're operating, list out the people who are going to be benefiting or your users of your products, not just the shareholders. Yeah, the shareholders actually, in my mind, should kind of be the last. First, if you're able to create a design within all of this that addresses the needs and concerns of the community, of the environment, of the user, of all of that, then you can create really creative solutions. System thinking design is not utilized enough from stage 1 in understanding how your thing integrates into a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That resonates. So, can you walk us through what you guys do, like in terms of like what is the core problem you solve, and like who comes to you?
It varies, honestly. It like my projects are so random in terms of how I get picked up on. Honestly, because I have a lot of experience in hospitality, because my brand is started in 2013 and it's still there and operating, and we built a bunch of different things around that. A lot of it is around hospitality and tourism, which a lot of countries around the world depend on hugely as not just a GDP earner, but also an employment. Hospitality tends to employ a lot of people. Around that, there's also a lot of infrastructural things, like right now in Sri Lanka. Two of the things that I'm advising on and hoping to kind of deepen my advising role in are on waste management and sewage treatment. Because a lot of people don't like. In Goa, I saw how when I moved to Goa, there was only about 3 million tourists coming annually, and now there's 9. So how an increase in tourism when because see, infrastructure needs to not only address the current problem, but the legacy issue, as well as the compounding consumption problem year on year. And while behavioral change can address certain things like how much plastic we produce, increase in purchasing power automatically drives up increase in consumption for plastic and waste. That's one. And then other issues like sewage, you can't tell people to go to the bathroom less. There's this many people on the planet. What are you going to do with it? So if you're creating more hotels, more rooms, more restaurants, how are you addressing that? Because right now, majority of sewage worldwide, I think it's about 60% is what I saw recently, is released into the ecosystem without any treatments, even in the US, right? Like in New York, when there's a storm, because there'll be overflow, they have to release it into the ocean. And sewage is something that gets only about like $6 million annually, because it's not a sexy topic. So, but it's something that affects everyone, right? It's been shown, it's linked right now in terms of marine conservation, that sewage, this unreleased stream of sewage, is part of what's also killing reefs.
And what
So
does
yeah,
winning look like for you guys, like over the next few years? And like how will you know that you have essentially moved the needle?
creating infrastructural projects that essentially address, but that I would say it would be a couple of things, like creating the infrastructural thing that not only meets the demand of today, but that has designed to grow with growing consumption requirements over the years, and helping simultaneously educate people about the behavioral need and use of said infrastructure. So again, like in places like the United States, we used to have a huge littering problem, a huge pollution problem. It's just that happened before my generation. It was in the 70s and 80s that this kind of concept of anti-littering and the infrastructure became bigger, which is kind of the same time that plastic first kind of blew up in terms of its integration into everyday products and product usage. In places like India, like I remember my ex told me that he remembers, and his mom and his whole family talk about, when plastic first kind of came into the country in a big way. It's within this last generation. So when you are introducing a new product into an ecosystem that they don't understand or don't know has a negative environmental and health effect on themselves, that's a behavior that has to take time to educate people on, which takes a minimum of 1 generation. So part of the problem is that nowadays, because of our immediate satisfaction, kind of immediacy of everything, right? You want a car, you can book an Uber or Bolt or whatever. You want something to your house, Amazon. We're all used to things getting solved, our needs to be, or desires to be solved immediately, but that's not the way that like behavioral change or the earth actually functions. It takes time for that type of learning and behavioral change and education. So I think on a short term, it would be having the infrastructure built and having the beginning programs at schools and within local communities to educate about the need for that infrastructure and how to use it properly.
Mm. Interesting. Cool. Well, with that, Jill, you want to help me, I guess, tell people, where are you blogging somewhere? Where do you share your thoughts on a regular basis? You want to also share the website, how people can learn more?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately don't really blog because I'm so busy with everything else that I'm doing.
Sure.
Um, I do from time to time get asked to do things like this or speak at conferences and panels on behalf of that. LinkedIn is kind of the thing that brings it all together because I have a consulting company in India and the United States, and now I'm also working in Sri Lanka. So I would say that's probably the easiest to stay because, yeah, I have different websites for each of my businesses, depending if it's the US one or India one and things like that. But
All right.
yeah, I would say LinkedIn
All
is
right.
the best way to reach out.
Cool. I see we have almost like 40 people listening live. So thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And Jill, hang out for 1 minute.